Hello, my name is Emmy DeGrappa. Each week, we bring you stories asking our guests the question why. We learn about passion, purpose, and the human experience. Brought to you by Wyoming Humanities with the generous support of the Wyoming Community Foundation. This is What's Your Why? Today, we are talking to Pastor Don McKenzie, Rabbi Ted Falcon, and Imam Jamal Rahman. They are also known as the Interfaith Amigos. The Interfaith Amigos do an inspiring presentation that offers a message of inclusion, empathy, and hope. In their life work and in their interfaith presentations, their message creates a bridge and opens the door to have and create conversations on religion and the interfaith experience. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you.
Well, we want to get to know you a bit personally, and we want to talk about your journey into faith-based studies, your life commitment to interfaith ministry and teaching. And I'm going to start with Pastor Don. And I want to know, when I was reading your bio, I understand you're a retired Church of Christ minister.
No, United Church of Christ.
United Church of Christ. Okay, thank you for that correction. And that you also have a country music band, which I found very intriguing. And so I wanted to know, where did you grow up and what influenced you to study theology?
Well, I'm from Chicago. And my parents, my brother and I grew up in a church-related family. You know, we went to church every Sunday. My parents were very active members of the church. Mother sang in the choir. My father was on the board of elders. And I went to a Presbyterian-related college, McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota, because they were flying the UN flag underneath the American flag. Literally, that's why I chose that. And I was lucky enough after my junior year to be selected for a program to work abroad. And I was a lifeguard at the Nile Hilton Hotel in Cairo. And I got to know many people there and began to understand the culture of the Middle East. And after my senior year, my wife, my friend Judy and I got married, my wife now, and went to Lebanon, south of Beirut, to teach in a school for a year. And we were evacuated during the Six-Day War and came ultimately to New Jersey. I went to seminary in Princeton. I worked at the seminary for 10 years while I was working on my PhD, and then worked in a church there. And as it happened, the minister of the church, my boss, was in a country band that I was in, which is how I got the job. And we sang together in that band, Life's Other Side, for 39 years in various places, including the Grand Ole Opry. And then I went to Hanover, New Hampshire, and switched from the Presbyterian Church to the United Church of Christ, which is the new name for the congregational tradition. From there to Seattle, to University Congregational Church, which is where I met my beloved friends, Ted and Jamal. And we started working right after 9/11, and here we are.
Wow, that is quite a journey. And what instrument did you play?
A guitar and bass.
Okay. I think it's interesting how there's kind of a stereotype of a minister that you don't have any other interest. That's what you do. That's all you do. But it's good that you have another self-expression. Yeah. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
I also want to ask Rabbi Ted, because, wow, what a journey you've taken, because you're a spiritual guide, an author, a teacher, and a therapist. And you founded the first meditative reform congregation. So tell us where you grew up and what were the early influences in your life of spirituality?
I appreciate the question, although I must say that it's getting to be a time in my life where it's harder and harder to remember that far back. I grew up in a family that was very identified in a liberal tradition of Judaism. My uncle was a rabbi in Boston. His grandfather was an Orthodox rabbi in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm from Cleveland. It was always a part of my life. The other thing that was always a part of my life was kind of this interest in consciousness. I got interested while I was in junior high in the process of hypnosis, which in those days I didn't know anything about meditation, but I was to learn later that there are many similarities between hypnotic trance and some of the processes of meditation. When I was 14, my family moved from a neighborhood that had a significant mix of population. There certainly it wasn't majority Jewish, but I had friends who were Jewish and friends who were not. We moved to a suburb where we were among the only Jewish family at the time. And it was my first encounter with anti-Semitism and the violence of anti-Semitism. My first day at a new school, somebody asked me in the boys' room whether I was a Jew. I said yes, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor trying to breathe because in response to my yes, I got punched in the stomach. I learned in very painful ways the people who, like I identified as friendly, just stood by and watched such events. I learned that a couple of people with whom I had played after school told me at a certain point they couldn't come to my house anymore because their parents found out that I was Jewish. Aside from having to deal with my personal issues relating to that, it became clearer and clearer to me that there are some serious problems. It's almost a built-in anti-Jewish into the Christian tradition, where Jesus is somehow not recognized as a bona fide Jew, but somehow he's something else, as if it's the Jewish community against Jesus rather than Jesus and all his followers are Jews. Anyway, my interest in consciousness led me in undergraduate school to a Jewish philosopher named Martin Buber, who talked about the dimensions of what he called the eternal thou, awakening through radical encounter of person to person, which kind of led me to my interest not only in spirituality, but also in psychology. I went to seminary thinking that I would be teaching Jewish philosophy. Never dawned on me that I would be leading a congregation. Lo and behold, my first job was in Los Angeles, California, which going from Ohio, seminary was in Cincinnati, Ohio, going from Ohio to Los Angeles in the late 1960s was like going to another world. And for somebody interested in consciousness and spirituality, it offered opportunities that were extremely exciting and rare. It also offered an opportunity to do retreats at a Catholic priory called St. Andrew's Priory, where I was able to enter into a kind of dialogue with the brothers and priests that started a track of healing some of the wounds that I carried in terms of interaction with the Christian community. So that my interest in interfaith activities kind of unfolded over the years from there. The synagogue I started in Los Angeles in 1978. I was interested in Jewish meditation. There was nowhere to do it. And so I wound up gathering a small group, and for various reasons, we became kind of official as a congregation. A significant portion of that congregation actually was made up of people who were not Jewish. So there was always an interfaith context. I was one of the early Reform rabbis to feel very comfortable involving myself in interfaith marriages. and even co-officiating with another clergy. I recognize that all authentic spiritual traditions are avenues to a shared universal. Because my passion is consciousness and spirituality, I am very aware of a focus on the universal aspects of my tradition and appreciating those aspects of other traditions as well. And that has been a good deal of our focus in our work as Interfaith Amigos, reclaiming the universal teachings, the essential spiritual teachings of each of our traditions, and at the same time being willing to identify some of the teachings in each of our traditions that are not universal and are not really so spiritual.
I can see how the three of you coming from such diverse backgrounds really does make a really interesting conversation. So I'm going to ask Imam Jamal what your journey was from Bangladesh. And as a Muslim Sufi minister, how did interfaith work become part of your passion? And you've also authored, several books which talk about the interfaith between Christianity, Judaism, and Muslim faith. And I think that's a challenge, really, just coming from my own background and hearing each one of you talk. So tell us about your journey.
Thank you so much, Emmy. I was born into a Muslim family in a country called Bangladesh. Very small in land size. It's about half the size of Oregon. Just to give you an idea, wow. Oregon has about 6-7 million people. We have, in half the size of Oregon, the entire half of the US population, 170 million people. So it's very crowded. My grandparents, and of course my parents also, are very grounded and rooted in Islam. My paternal grandparents particularly, they come from a lineage of teachers and healers. But our Islam is, shall I say, fragrant or perfumed with Sufism, which is not a denomination. It's simply a heartfelt aspiration to live the spirit of the tradition. So it's a very heart-based approach to the religion. It just so happened, destiny-wise or circumstantially, that my father became a diplomat. And so most of my life was spent outside of where I was born. And we're mostly in Middle Eastern countries and European countries. And my parents, being very liberal, very open-minded, they encouraged myself and my siblings, I have a brother and a sister, to visit all the different houses of worship. So at a very young age, I became very familiar and had a love for other traditions also, and became very connected to what my brothers would call the universal aspects of one's holy book, the universal verses, the revealed verses in our scriptures. It also so happened that my parents were posted to Iran and to Turkey. And there's a lot of wonderful sages who are very loved, but particularly Hafez and Rumi, a 13th century sage Rumi, who is very loved and studied with great devotion in those two countries. And he's a great scholar of Islam. So I learned the Quran through the lens of the poetry of Rumi. So Rumi, for example, says, the Quran is like a shy bride. Don't approach her directly. Approach her through her friends. And who are the friends? Mostly these mystics who have done a deep study of the different traditions. So I became quite familiar with not only the Islamic tradition, the Islamic scriptures, which is mostly the Quran, but also the Islamic mystics like Rumi, Hafiz, Ibn Arabi. And then to cut a long story short, I studied in America, undergraduate and graduate studies in Oregon and California. And I happened to visit Seattle. And in my mind, I thought, if I ever get a chance I would like to spend some time in Seattle. And I got that chance. And so Seattle became my home of creating community. And I think it's because of my background, having connected with the communities of different traditions. I wanted to create an interfaith community. Making a long story short, I started teaching classes in my house. I was surprised it attracted people of different faiths. And for 7 years, we had a community called Circle of Love. Mm-hmm. And again, a long story short, it led us to this place here. This is a church building. And this was given to us for free. And we were so surprised and so excited and so delighted that this small building, this church building, which is the oldest church building in Seattle, 1890, we renamed it Interfaith Community Sanctuary. And here we aspire to foster a living, breathing interfaith community. We say, what does it mean to not just talk about interfaith, but to live interfaith? And this is our aspiration here. And we say that, it is not only important to acknowledge the differences in different religions. You mentioned the monotheistic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, also Hinduism, Buddhism, the pagan tradition, Sikhism, Jainism, not only to acknowledge the differences in different traditions or to honor them, tolerate them and honor them, but really to celebrate them. That's our goal. And so we have people of different religions and also people who say none of the above, spiritual but not religious. And we find that the best way to overcome differences, theological differences, doesn't matter what your religion is just by becoming friends, connecting on a human level, and not just meeting occasionally, meeting frequently. So there is established a genuine personal relationship. Then we find that no matter what the difference is, it now no longer looms as a threat, and it creates the space where we can actually join hands, regardless of our differences, in engaging in projects dear to all of our hearts, like social justice issues, programs on environmental issues. And of course, after 9/11, I met my brothers, Rabbi Ted Falcon, Don McKenzie. So now I wear two hats. I'm the imam in this place here, Interfaith Community Sanctuary. I'm also 1/3 of the Interfaith Amigos.
How did you come up with the name Interfaith Amigos? Why Amigos? Who thought of that name?
An editor at the Christian Century magazine, we got featured in a cover story in August of 2008. And the cover said, Seattle's Three Amigos. And that's a movie that we're not particularly fond of, even though the people in it are funny, but it doesn't necessarily treat Hispanic people with respect. And so we changed it to Interfaith Amigos, and that became our brand.
Okay. I was curious about that, how the Spanish word got in there, but now I understand. So what brought you all together? What was it? Was it just a coincidence that you all came together to have a conversation? And what was the beginning that you created a dialogue and a presentation?
I knew Imam Jamal because we were on the board of a group that was trying to form a spiritual university called Tahoma. Tahoma is the native name for Mount Rainier. And I was the identified spiritual rabbi in Seattle, and he was the identified spiritual imam. The university actually never happened, but when 9/11 happened, Imam Jamal was the first person I called because I saw what was being broadcast about Islam. And I said, people have to see a different face of Islam. And I invited him to join me for the Shabbat, the Friday night service that week at my congregation. It was the first time that I'd heard him teach. And it was the first time he'd heard me teach. And we knew right away that we wanted to work together. And we just started doing it. Like there's this rabbi and this imam wandering through the streets and hallways of Seattle. Don McKenzie was part of an interfaith group that met once a month that I also was part of. We even got assigned together at one point to have responsibility for a chapter, I think, in one of Karen Armstrong's books.
Right.
Several months into the year following 9/11, as we were starting to look at how to mark the first anniversary, we needed a larger sanctuary and we needed a Christian partner. And we came to Pastor Don. And I love the way he responds to the request that we have him join us.
Tell us about that, Pastor Don.
Well, he called and said, he told me, they were planning this event and did I want to be a part of it? And by the way, could it be at my church? And I had two feelings simultaneously. I thought, I can't do one more thing and I cannot not do this. I just cannot not do it. So I said yes, and we did it. And afterward, as we were debriefing, this was after September 11, 2002, we looked at each other and said, we can't stop now. And so I think we realized very quickly that we shared an intuition that if we could get to know each other and penetrate the barriers that have separated our traditions, we could find ways to cooperate in addressing the moral issues that we are facing. And that has been our mission. And we believe very strongly that unless there's a change of heart on the inside, so to speak, there will be nothing of substance that will last on the outside. And so our mission has been to talk about ways to speak to each other effectively about the differences and similarities in our traditions, and to begin to find ways to cooperate using those things to address these issues.
What I neglected to mention was what happened once Imam Jamal and I started together.
Yes, and the key is this, Emmy, that we became friends.
Mm-hmm.
And that really is the critical work we all need to do, whether it's politics, whether it's race or culture or religion. Can we create the environment in a natural way where there is a human bonding? You see, what happens in interfaith is people get together, maybe on radio show, but mostly, through music, good food, during Christmas, during Ramadan, during Seder, during Hindu, Buddhist festivals, and everybody is on their best behavior. The complaint is, it's very infrequent they get together, but when they do, everybody's behavior is absurdly nice. But when they go home, Muslims become terrorists, Christians become liars, Jews become occupiers, unless, and this is the key, unless some of them connect and meet more frequently and become friends. That is when the real work starts.
Are there certain lines you can't cross over? Because every faith, has its tradition, has its core, let's say. And for like the Christian, it's the Bible, right? And every faith has a place where this is absolutely what I believe. Or does it become gray on what you believe? Or do you still hold to that tradition with the ability to accept someone who doesn't believe like you do?
Emmy, I'll just say one thing, and we can go over it together as three interfaith brothers, is that we believe that you just don't talk about these things directly, these difficult issues. There are stages. We call it the 6 stages of interfaith dialogue. Maybe Brother Ted can start. Is it okay if we tell you the six stages of the dialogue?
Yeah, go ahead.
We believe that effective dialogue actually begins not by getting together and talking about our similarities, and certainly not by getting together and talking about our differences, but getting together and creating contexts in which we can meet each other as human beings. So we in our own work, we work with a series of questions, people sitting around tables, responding to questions about how they experience their faith, not their beliefs,
Okay.
but their life experiences, which we all can relate to. And it's on the basis of meeting each other as human beings, meeting each other as persons, that then we encourage the second stage. There's a second step in an effective interfaith dialogue is looking to what we consider to be the core teaching in each tradition. Not the core belief, but the core teaching. If people don't have an affiliation to a tradition, what's the core teaching in their lives? What do you look toward when making significant choices and decisions in your life? What is most important? We look at our traditions and have perceived that the core teaching in Judaism is oneness. A belief that there's only one.
Mm-hmm.
This is ethical monotheism which sprang from Jewish tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Just an awareness of this one that connects everybody and that in fact informs an ethic, whether it's called the Golden Rule or however it's called. If we believe that the core teaching in Christianity is unconditional love. It's not that doesn't exist in Judaism and Islam. It's just that's a core focus in the teachings of Jesus. That's a universal, unconditional love. We believe that the core teaching in Islam is compassion. And in our programs, each of us describe why we see that as our core teaching and how that impacts not only our own lives, but our interfaith life together. And that raises it. We're not talking about, I believe this. We're talking about a reality, a spiritual reality that transcends, that connects. Because oneness and unconditional love and compassion, in fact, connect us all.
So then the third stage, and you'll see, Emmy, that these are sequential, is the opportunity. We see it's an invitation to look at the verses and practices in our traditions and say which are consistent with our core teachings and which are inconsistent. And underneath that, of course, is the assumption that we make that some of those things are the consequence of spiritual wisdom, and some are simply the consequence of egocentrism. And so we encourage people to think critically, using the core teachings to examine those things and really try to understand which are the most useful in terms of spirituality and so forth. A spiritual path, something that provides purpose and meaning and seeks to contribute to the common good. The fourth stage, having done those three things, then we find there's an opportunity, having developed a certain amount of trust, an opportunity to then get into some of the areas that have been very hard to talk about. And just, for example, two of those areas in our three traditions. One, of course, the conflict between the people of Israel and the people of Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is the question of conversion, not so much for Jews, but for Christians and Muslims. It's a concern for Jews because they get assaulted by Muslims and Christians with the idea that Christianity is superior or that Islam is superior, which we believe those are among the biggest stumbling blocks to those important conversations.
Well,
and the fifth stage. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious when I'm hearing this, because I did travel to Israel and I saw all the different Jewish sects, just like in this country, the different Christian churches are, many, many and different. And I can't speak to the Muslim tradition on how many different kinds of, except, the radical Islam, groups, but that's, the extreme. So you have people that come from all, even in their own faith, they are different. Even in their own belief system, they are different in how they believe and how they practice. So how do you address, do you run into that where you're having conversations and you have, let's say, two Christians, one believes in singing and the other one doesn't, right? Just in that conversation alone, how do you deal with that?
This sort of tallies with the fifth stage where if you have established a friendship, that's the key again, a connection. The missing link is there is no human connection. When there's a human connection, when there is friendship, where there's people of the same religion who vary in the degrees of devotion or understanding, or different religions, we begin to realize at a certain point that if you're willing to be vulnerable, that all religions or different kinds of thinking of the same religion are really paths to a shared universal. And that comes only when you get to know the other, again, on a personal level. And so, for example, I'm a Muslim. I study the Quran. If I look at the Quran from different angles, I have a better understanding of the Quran, which is why we say interfaith is not about conversion. It's about completion. The last point, or a very critical point, is whether you have a religion, don't have a religion, different degrees in your belief system. A very critical part is, am I doing the work of spiritual practices of becoming more Christ-like, more Buddha-like, more Allah-like, more Elohim-like? If I'm not doing that work, none of this matters really. It's all talk. So, for example, if we talk about social justice, the most critical work is, besides legislation, education, just talking, it's about overcoming my biases about Hispanics, about African Americans, about Asians, about Blacks, about whites. How do I overcome my conditioned prejudices? It requires spiritual practices. Our biggest problem today is environmental degradation. There's a wonderful saying I was reading about a Zen Buddhist environmentalist who was saying, taking care of the river is not about the river. It is about the heart. That is, whether you are a liberal Christian, a conservative Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Jew, if I don't do the work of opening up my heart, nothing is going to change in a structural way. We want structural changes.
Well, you all are definitely on a lifelong journey. I think all these things are so deep. And, growing up in a family, a big Hispanic family, and you're unraveling that all the time, aren't you? Don't you think you're constantly, even in your own heart, you're constantly unraveling, different ways that you think, or or maybe you don't think about something intentionally until you have to think about it intentionally, and then you realize how you really feel about a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim. Does that make sense?
I think unraveling is a very good word. I mean, I think we have, in our weekly meetings for 20 years, have committed ourselves to being open to the new, to finding ways to, as we say, penetrate these barriers, and to helping each other see our own traditions from other perspectives, and then see other traditions ourselves, as Jamal said, as a way to deepen our appreciation for those things, and also at the same time shine more light on our own traditions. What's important about Christianity? What's important about Judaism? What's important about Islam? They all bring messages, each one. And this is just our three, but others too, that are crucial and could contribute to the healing of the earth and the social fabric But religion, as long as it insists on being separate and superior, can't do it. We believe that deep in the human heart is a conviction we're all part of the same thing, the interconnectedness of all being. But it's a hard place to get to because of egocentrism, preoccupation, prejudice. Music can do it, eloquent speech, the preciousness of relationships, spiritual practices. But as I say, religion can't do it unless it is able to let go of the conviction that it is the only way, that it's better than the others, and that it must remain separate. And we are here on the earth, the three of us right now, to work on that and find it very, very fulfilling.
Yes, I imagine you do. And I have one last question for you all. I want to know how people can find you, how they can watch your Interfaith Amigos presentation. And if you have one last thing, each of you, to say, that if you could wave a magic wand, what would that one thing happen in the world that would mean so much to you?
Magic wand.
You only get one.
I think if people want to get an idea of our teachings, if they go to YouTube, for example, and put in Interfaith Amigos, it'll start leading to various things, because we've been videoed a lot. We've done a lot of presentations. They all exist somewhere in the vast territory of the internet. You're asking a very difficult, easy question. If I had one wish, it would be that more and more of us could wake up. And by that, I mean, wake up to the essential nature of our own being. Wake up out of the ego trance that keeps us separate, that keeps us defensive, that keeps us on guard, that keeps us competitive with one another, that keeps us always judging one another, that keeps us feeling like we are not enough, or we are not deserving, or we need more, or we don't have enough. I would wish that increasingly enough of us awaken to the deep essential nature of our being, that in fact is a shared being. It's a shared consciousness, a shared awareness, a shared presence. I often say the one looking at you through my eyes and the one looking at me through your eyes is the same one. And I see through the mask of my own history and my own experiences and my own culture, and you see through the mask of your own. But the one who sees is that one awareness. And to the extent we can become awake to that, in a very natural way, we will stop bringing pain to each other. And we will be seeking ways to heal and to support, to love and to express compassion.
No, because I was thinking that was a beautiful answer. And, being awake. And then it started to make me think, well, Pastor Don, I'm going to ask you this. How do we get awake? Is it nature versus nurture? How do we get awake? Because it's one thing to say, I hope people get there. I do too. But is it upbringing? What is it? What do you think young people, you could tell someone who's young how they get awake?
Certainly lots of patterns of experiences lead us to a place where we recognize that spiritual practices, regular spiritual practices, can help us wake up. But it's, everyone has a different set of experiences, different DNA. But it does take that desire to wake up. I mean, I think we'd all say what Ted said. This is because if we could wake up, we could see the other not as color of skin, ethnicity, success, money, whatever. We would be able to say, Namaste, the divine in me greets the divine in you, which bypasses everything superficial and greets the core of each being in a way that is not only healing, but helpful and hopeful.
So, Imam Jamal, I want to ask you just to tie this all together, because we want to be awake. And then the question is, how do we wake up? How do we encourage people to wake up? What is the action in your community outside of attending an interfaith meeting? How do you influence people every day?
I think it is very critical in our times. Like Thich Nhat Hanh, that wonderful Buddhist master, said that what will save us is not a Messiah or a prophet or a prophetess. What will save us is creating authentic communities, circles of love. Jamal, do you have a circle with you that loves you, you trust, and who loves the truth, with whom you can do spiritual practices to raise your consciousness, with whom you can join hands and do some projects together? It is these grassroots circles that we create in our lives, authentic circles that'll save us, that'll enhance us, that'll awaken us, and particularly as we interact with the others. Just remaining within my tradition can be the worst form of tribalism, no matter how good I am. We're finding this, for example, in France. There's a lot of multiculturalism. It has caused the worst disaster. Just by saying we love multiculturalism, it is only going to work if the different begin to interact, interconnect, intercooperate, intercollaborate with the other. So my prayer is that young or middle-aged or old, we have our little circles of love, of trust, of loving the truth in our lives, and we interact with the others at a grassroots level. That will bring peace. I would say this model we have, Interfaith Amigos, is not just a clerical model. It's a model for people of all ages, of all different kinds of orientation, not just religious, could be political, could be just as human beings getting together and doing things together. Those grassroots circles will just change the world.
Well, I'm going to end on that note, because I think that is a really good point, that it is grassroots, it is community, and it isn't just the Interfaith Amigos. And it would be great if each of you had a mentor to replace you and speak that same message that you've been putting out there in the world in a new way with a younger generation. So that's just what I think would be great. Thank you so much for joining me today, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Let me want to say one more thing. We must all get together and laugh a lot. We must not forget that. Laugh.
Yeah, you got to laugh. That's true. All right, you all take care. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Your Why? Brought to you by Wyoming Humanities with support from Wyoming Community Foundation and generous supporters like you. To learn more, go to thinkwhy.org, subscribe, and never miss a show.